Vamos bueno, un pequeño anuncio. Después de la sesión del profesor Raghu, va a haber una foto grupal. There's going to be a group picture after Dr. Raghu's talk. And don't know exactly where, but we just follow Norma, and everything is fine. Well, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Trivellore Raghunathan. He's currently he's the director of the Survey Research Center of the Institute of Social Research of the University of Michigan. He was chair of biostatistics at the School of Public Health of the University of Michigan. And he's also a research professor in the joint program in survey methodology at the University of Maryland. He received his PhD in statistics from Harvard University in 1987. His research interests include missing data, multiple imputation. Oh, there's a lot. Well, I'm going to read them anyway. Combining information from multiple surveys, Bayesian methods, privacy, confidentiality and disclosure limitation, small area estimation, hierarchical models, longitudinal data analysis, and statistical methods for epidemiology. We also mentioned he's developed the free software IVE-ware for implementing a sequential regression approach for multiple imputations, which is a software that has been mentioned several times in the talks. Well, again, thank you very much for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's the first time for me to come to Mexico, and it's a beautiful place, and the mountains are so attractive. And I'm so impressed that you're all sitting inside when the weather is so beautiful outside, and after long lunch, I think you can all have siesta. And I was kind of worried about giving this talk because Joe has already talked about it, missing data, and Jorg has given excellent talk about the missing data. There is already record linkage has been covered, and registry data, everything has been covered. And I was saying that yes. Okay, good. I'll give you some background on that survey system. So this will be all a lot of revision and some new, and hopefully you will find something useful. So I'm from the Institute for Social Research. So the Institute for Social Research was founded in 1948. So these were a bunch of people who were working in Second World War on social issues affecting the army units. And then after World War II, they decided that they wanted to use the knowledge they have gained to create an institute to study the behavior, social behavior. So in 1946, they went to various universities, and most universities were not interested, but they came to University of Michigan, and then University of Michigan looked at them, he says, okay. But you can come here, you can stay here, we'll give you some office, but don't expect any money from us. So these are the entrepreneurs, there are 5 or 6 entrepreneurs, they said that yes, we can do it, but whatever we raise as an indirect cost, as the universities have indirect costs, whatever we raise, we should keep it ourselves. And the university said, oh, a bunch of social scientists, what are they going to do? How much they're going to raise? They said, okay. And then they have regretted ever since. today, the Institute for Social Research has 5 centers. Survey Research Center is the largest center, and the annual operating budget for the ISR is about $110 million per annual. And SRC, being the largest, has a $85 million annual budget. Remaining $25 million is distributed across the remaining 4 centers. They are pretty small centers. So Survey Research Center conducts very large-scale surveys. Some of the people that you might know, Health and Retirement Study, Panel Study of Income Dynamics, which started in 1968 and has been going on since 1968. The Drug Use Study, the Monitoring the Future, and so on. And one of the most famous study, which is a small part of the SRC, but it's the biggest name getter, is the Survey of Consumer Sentiments and Consumer Attitudes. They publish every month on the first Friday. They publish a sentiment index, and that is really an important part in Wall Street Journal. Wall Street, they look at it because stocks can move up or down, and that's the one thing that keeps me awake in the night, is that I want to make sure that I'm publishing it on the dot, and so that everybody gets that information out. So I'm the director of that place, and we have about 90 faculty members in the center, and about 500 staff in that center, and we have about 1,000 interviewers that are distributed all over the country. There are 125 locations where they are placed. So it gives me a lot of opportunities and a lot of grief as well when you are managing this many people. So let me start talking about this particular talk, and this one I'm going to be really talking about several applications, and then some of these applications I have done in the past, and some applications are ongoing work, and all of them are using the multiple imputation as a framework for addressing the variety of problems. So before I proceed, I want to really keep that what the frame of mind and the framework that I'm coming from in order to draw inference. A survey inference essentially has a population that is given in the bigger circle. Let's see. And then you have the sample that is a smaller circle, and then you have a respondent is even a smaller circle. So this kind of a setup leads to a kind of a data structure where you have a frame data, and then you have a data on the sample, and then you have a data on respondents. And this could be, this is a lot simplified, because you could have a Swiss cheese pattern of missing data on these respondents as well. So to me, I think all the solid colors are known, and what I don't know is those dashed or patterned data set. So that's what I don't know, and my whole philosophy is that uncertainty is there, and therefore I want to capture that uncertainty. The best way to capture the uncertainty is to construct a predictive distribution of the unobserved given the observed. So from what I know to really predict about what I don't know. And that is the survey inference, and that's the way I think I would consider all the inferences about. I'll group all the things that I don't know and group all the things that I know, and I want to know about what I don't know conditional on what I know. And that's a survey inference setup that I consider like sort of filling in the unobserved portion of the population unobserved portion of the sample and unobserved portion of the population. So I want to fill in this entire data set. So obviously the multiple imputation framework works well within this context in the sense that I want to really create a synthetic population. So I'll kind of generate populations and then calculate whatever I want to do, calculate for the population, and that way I can characterize the population better. So now I think I'm from that simple idea, so I'm going to really go beyond that simple survey data alone. And there are lots of data sources are becoming available, and these analysis of all these data sources can inform policy decision. So therefore we want to capitalize on different kinds of data sets that are available and inform us about the population that we are trying to study. So some of the examples include the rich sampling frame data, but nowadays there are commercial data companies that will allow you to, they will sell you data on the household level, at the address level. They may not be really good in the sense that they may not be accurate for drawing inferences, but they could be good correlates or good covariates for us to use them as a predictor, for example. So we have a lot of administrative data that is becoming available, tax record data or program data and crime data. There are many, many sources of administrative data that are becoming available. Then we have a number of surveys, and we ourselves conduct so many surveys, and we go to the same kind of areas, and then the question is that whether we can bring all those surveys together to combine the information from those surveys. And then we also have embedded experimental data. So we do a lot of experiments in terms of whether is this the right way to ask this question, or is it the right way to collect this question, or are the people answering truthfully? So for example, we may have administrative data on whether or not you had accidents in the prior 6 months. And we know exactly, because we get the data, administrative data, whether or not they had an accident. And we ask them whether they had accident or not. And then if they say yes, and if the answer is no in the registered database, that means that there is a telescoping problem. There's a memory recall problem. If they say no, and if there's an S, then we know that there are kind of a memory problem, or they're lying, or whatever it is. So we can embed those experimental data in this rich context in the integration process. There are also non-survey data sources that are social media, credit card transaction, etc. Those are also available now at the various population levels, and not on everybody. So therefore, the framework for integrating this information from these sources in sort of in a principled manner is desirable and may be useful for having a better policy decision. So here is a very simplified schematic. So you are all these data are coming from different sources, and then they may be linked or they may not be linked. Some of them could be linked, some of them could not be linked. You have these data sources that are coming in, frame, experiments, administration, survey, non-survey, so on and so forth. And then somehow we want to use some sort of models to really align them up so that they are created using, they are kind of aligned either probabilistically or they are deterministically aligned, so that they create a missing data kind of a structure, and then use them to multiply impute the missing values, and then create a snapshots of multiply imputed data set that synthesizes the information that is there in this data sources, and then put them out, and then simply the analysis of these complete data sets or completed data sets will give us a way to integrated information from all these different sources. So, so these require, that's kind of a different strategies are needed from going from here to here, and the different strategies are needed from here to here. I'm going to talk about sort of a few of those strategies, a few of those individual components that are needed that I've been working on. So, of course, the domains to be addressed, the missing data, I think that's what we have been talking a lot about in the context. There are also measurement error differences or measurement errors. That is, you are trying to collect the data on a particular variable, but it may not be accurate, and then you may want to really adjust the accuracy of those. That's why I call it a measurement error or measurement differences or response errors, so on. Then there's also record linkage. So because these are not linked all the time by a unique ID, although I envy Statistics Sweden having all these linkable data set. In US, we don't have that kind of a linkable data set, nor there will be a political will to have sort of that kind of a linkable data set. But so we have to do some sort of, some linkable, some non-linkable, so some sort of a probabilistic approaches may be needed. So these I will classify into sort of three different kinds that we know that same subjects are in the data sets to be linked, or we know that there are different subjects in the data set to be linked. And this I would call, sometimes people call it as a fusion. That is, two different data sets and then you want to fuse the two data set because there is no overlap of subjects in between the two data set. And then there are some same subjects in the data set to be linked, and others we don't know. And we don't even know whether they are same or not. Now, this also, I think, when you link all these data sets together, this raises the issue of privacy and confidentiality when you are releasing the data set. That needs to be addressed as well. And I think the multiple imputation framework can be used in that context as well to address that issue of that when you release the data, so making sure that they are not identifiable, they are not individually identifiable. And then the last is that prediction of the unobserved portion of the populations. Once you have leveraged all the information that is available, and then you use the frame information to really to impute or administrative data on the non-sample portion of the population to impute the unobserved portion of the populations. So my focus is going to be on these three, and then I think I wanted to make sure that I get to this, I get this out in the front, because that's what I'm interested in, is really creating a synthetic populations or generative populations. Now, when I say generating population, that doesn't mean that I have to create the huge population, because I need some summary statistics of those populations. That's what I'm trying to draw inference about. And those may be reduced some sort of a parameters in the model, or summary measures or sufficient statistics from the unobserved portion of the data. Now, the setting that I'm trying to do is that there are multiple users are wanting to use this data set. They want to analyze different subsets of the data set, and they have multiple analytical techniques, and some have favorite software package in R or SPSS or SAS that they want to apply. There are different skill levels of incomplete data set, dealing with the incomplete, so that we want to really not bother them with the notion of the incomplete data set. And they know what they would have done if they had a complete data. That's the whole idea of the multiple imputation, is to reduce or remove the burden of dealing with missing data so that people can focus on the analysis that they want to do. And that's what they are deeply interested in. And they have a software for performing the complete data analysis is available, and then we want to have a flexibility of whatever software you want to use, you should be able to use that setup. So that's a setting that we are looking at. Now, I won't go through this in more detail because I think York has covered it and Joe has covered it, and I can't add anything more than what they have already done. So, so here is the typical data set with the p-variables. And I think that most cases, you'll have all these kinds of discrete, continuous, semi-continuous, as well as multivariate data. So you have the observed data, and then you have a missing data. The traditional, you can apply a joint models, or you can use a sequential regression approach. I think in the complicated says that's the only game in town in terms of sequential regression approach is the game in town if you have all these complicated data. So the ideal imputations are draws from some sort of a predictive distribution of the missing values given the observed values. Now, imputations are not real values, and that's a point that needs to be emphasized, and I think because I've been burned many times by people thinking that my imputations are real values, and imputations are not real values. I can give you an example. So when I graduated and I went to University of Washington, I went to a bunch of doctors and gave a presentation if they had a missing data problem. So their income was missing. So I gave them a presentation about imputation, and their jaw dropped. They said, "What a mistake. We shouldn't have hired this man because he's making up data." I said, well, I'm not making up data. I'm just rectangularizing the information that is there. They didn't believe me, so they said, okay, I'll give you a test. So they took a data set, it was an income, and they deleted some observations. They said, okay, Mr. Raghunathan, go and impute. So I imputed. I went back to them, I have imputed. They said, okay, let us have a test. What did you get for ID number 1357? It was the income. I said, 15,000. And the doctors all smiled. They said, wrong. That is actually 30,000. So I said, okay, we'll give you the next chance, another chance. I said, what did you get for ID number 2375? And I said, 30,000. They again smiled, wrong. So I didn't get this, I was getting this wing, is that what they were trying to think is that I would get the actual value for these respondents. And that is impossible. If I could do that, I would be living in a penthouse, not giving a talk here, and everybody will be lining up in front of my house, in front of my penthouse. Mr. Raghunathan, we want your data, right? So that is not the goal. The goal is to get information, the inference right. So you are getting a plausible data set from the population. Therefore, your inferences are valid for the population. So it's kind of an inference validity rather than individual microdata validity. There's no way you can get a microdata validity through imputation. And then that was the best example York talked about, is that you don't want a best value to be put there, because best value is not what you're looking for. You're looking for the data set that looks like real data set. Right? So therefore, the imputation data set should have exactly the same vagaries as the real data set. It should imitate the properties of the real data set. And of course, the uncertainties have to be associated with the imputes, and that's where the multiple imputation comes in, where you create multiple data set. Each set is a draw from the predictive distribution of the missing values. So if you have 50 data sets, and you get a 50, if you do 50 imputations, you get a 50 completed data set. You analyze each completed data set, and then combine the results in a easy way to produce a multiple imputation inference. And especially this is useful in a public use data context because data provider creates the imputes for the multiple users who can analyze the data with the complete data methods. An advantage is that as a data producer, I have access to lots of other information. Like, for example, we routinely collect the interviewer observations about the neighborhoods. And then we ask them about, even though they are non-respondent, we ask them about how many car garages they have and what kind of housing structure they have, you know. And then if they allow the people to go inside, then we ask them to observe what is the situation inside, you know, and then they make note of all those things. Those are very, very important predictors of income, but we won't release that to anybody. And those are all interviewer observations. So as a data producer, I have a lot of access to lots of other data sources that I may not be willing to release those things, but I think I can use them in the imputation. Therefore, the imputer, the analyst, is getting a better inference by using these imputed data set. So I won't go through this. They already, Jorg went through this. You estimate from each data set, and then average of the estimate across the D data sets is the multiple imputation estimate, and then you get a within estimate, the estimate of the variance from the D data set, and then you have this within and between that is the additional uncertainty due to missing values, and that's a loss of information because of the missing values. WD is what you would get if you had no missing values. This is the additional variance that you are having because of the missing values. And that sometimes is very useful to know what percentage is this quantity compared to the total quantity. That is called as a fraction of missing information. That is how much information you have lost because of imputations. So theoretical rationale for this is that you have a complete data which is broken down into the observed data and the not observed data. And then there is an observation indicator which says that which one gets observed, which one doesn't get observed. Then you have a model is a joint distribution of complete data and then this R, the observation indicator, which you can break it down into substantive model, which is the model generating the complete data, and then this is the nuisance model, that is which one you get to use, which one you get to see, which one you don't get to see is an observation indicator model. And then you can also split it in the other way, where it's called as a pattern mixture model. So this is called as a selection model, where you have a substantive model, and then you select which one. There's a selection going on, which one gets observed, which one gets not observed. And then there's a prior distribution for theta and phi. And then your imputation is basically drawing the values of the not observed, the unknown parameters given the observed data, which is y ops and r. And that's the rationale for creating the imputation. And that's what we will be using across all measurement error and confidentiality and record linkage and so on and so forth. Now, one assumption that is made is what is called as the ignorability. That is, in a nutshell, is saying that if you have observed data and if you're able to predict the unobserved data, the error in the prediction is random. So the error in prediction is just random noise. That's what I think intuitively is a simple way of thinking about, is that the missing values or not observed values are predictable from the observed values, subject to some random errors. And that's what this assumption really means. And it really depends upon what kind of variables you have to condition on. As you condition on more and more variables, this becomes more and more plausible assumption. So it's really, I think, it's a conditional assumption. That is, more data you have, more believable this assumption is. So Now, next, I think, let me talk about the measurement error, because again, I'm going to bring in the missing data structure on the measurement error problems. So I'm going to quickly go over the 3 examples that I worked recently, or in recently means 10, 15 years. So here is a population-based study that we were doing in Seattle. And the goal was to assess the relationship between omega-3 fatty acids and a primary cardiac arrest. And omega-3 fatty acids, mostly people get by eating fish. And more you eat fish, and more omega-3 fatty acids you get. And that somehow is thought to be protective of sudden cardiac arrest. That is, you are healthy, nothing happens, but suddenly you collapse. Because of intense. So the gold standard was the blood assay, and it was not available for all the disease, all the cases and controls, because some people refused to drawing of the blood. Some paramedics forgot to draw the blood, and lots of other reasons that they did not get the blood results. So we were worried about this missing data, so we built in these alternatives when we designed the study. The alternative one was to estimate the dietary intake based on self-report. So we ask people, what did you eat? How much did you eat? And so on and so forth. The people who are dead, they can't respond, so we didn't have data on them. And so therefore, we had to go to the alternative 2. Alternative 2 was to ask spouse. I said, what did your husband or wife eat? And you know how that goes. That we know in such stories that I think the best predictor, the reliability of alternative 2 was really how long they have been married. The longer they have been married, and age. So older people, long years of marriage, wife knew exactly what husband was eating. Husband had no clue what wife was eating. So it was a very interesting dynamic that took place. Anyway, so goal was to really, for us, goal was to get a logistic regression of the disease status on the gold standard measures blood assay. So there's a kind of a measurement error problem. You have a bunch of covariates, and then you have a disease status, you have a blood work on some people, and then you have a self-report on the dietary intake on some people, and then the spouse variable was available on everybody. And unfortunately, nobody said that I can't, because they'd like to talk about the spouse. So they were ready to talk about their spouse. And so there was no missing values there. So measurement error model here is that we want to really predict the blood assay variables and then use the relationship between the disease status and the blood assay variables, adjust for some covariates. So you can think of this as sort of a standard missing data problem, except that you are having these other variables. They are not part of the model, but they are useful predictors for predicting the blood assay. So this is the paper that discusses this particular method. Now, the example 2 is the combining information from a self-report and the clinical measures to improve the analysis. So the National Health Interview Survey is a very large population-based survey conducted by the National Center for Health Statistics. And they ask a variety of health conditions. Did doctor ever tell you that you have hypertension? You have high blood pressure? Did doctor ever tell you that you have a diabetes? And so on and so forth. Now, one of the concern is that if you don't go to the doctor, you may say no. That doesn't mean that you don't have it, because you may not have gone to the doctor to have an occasion to tell you that you have the blood pressure or you have the diabetes and so on. Unfortunately, we have another survey conducted by the same agency, which is called National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, that collects the same set of covariates as NHIS, but they also collect a self-report, but they also measure them. So they get an examination, and they get a blood draw, and then they measure the hemoglobin levels and fasting glucose levels, or they get a blood pressure measured. So when you use this data in conjunction with HIS, we might be able to correct for any deficiency that is there in the self-report data, right? So we appended these two data together, and then that creates a missing data structure, and then we kind of multiply imputed the clinical values for these people in HIS. The one difference is that in the analysis, ultimate analysis, this is not used once after the imputation is done. Only this analysis, this data set is used. That creates some sort of uncongeniality, because you are throwing away the information that was assumed in the imputation model, but not in the, that is used in the imputation model, but that was thrown away in the analysis model. So the analysis model throws away the data that was important part of the imputation model, but that's a simple fix is available for fixing that problem of using the subset of the data. And the third example is a most recent example, is that when you do a long-term studies, the blood assay technology changes over time. And we have this data that we have already collected on outcome, and then old technology was used to measure the blood assay. And if you want to rerun all of them using the new method, it's very expensive. So here, therefore, we said that, well, we'll take a subsample. We get a pool of blood samples from similar age, gender population, and we collected from an office pool. So we just said, well, will you be willing to give us a blood? And similar age, gender group, and then we drew blood from them, mixed them up, and then separated them, and then ran through the old and new. And these are not part of our original data set, because there's no outcome here, because these are completely new data set. So goal is to sort of make a correction for the changes between the old and new technology, so that we can run a regression of outcome on the new technology. Now, one thing is that I think the old and new, the outcome is not measured on these people at all. So therefore, there's no way to estimate the partial correlation between the old and new conditional on the outcome. So therefore, that is a problem in this unidentifiability is a problem. So here we assumed that if you knew the actual good measure, then the old measure doesn't add anything to the outcome. So therefore, the partial correlation between y and x given w is same as the simple correlation between y and x. That allows us to sort of impose a constraint, because all other correlations are measurable, they can be inferred about. Therefore, there's only one correlation that we don't know in the trivariate normal distribution, that this is the way we used it. So it's a trivariate normal distribution with 3 means and 3 variances and 2 correlation coefficients. The third correlation coefficient is automatically determined by the 2 correlation coefficients. So we use the Gibbs sampling to draw the means and variances and the 2 correlation coefficients, and the third correlation coefficient is automatically computed and then you create the multiple imputation for the missing new values in the previous data set. So that way, I think you fill in these values in this old data set A, and then you then you run a regression of outcome on the new imputed new variables. So this is another example where you can use a multiple imputation framework to account for measurement error or better measures, although they are not available on everybody in your data set. Now, the record linkage statistical matching, again, Brenda gave a wonderful presentation on all the methods that are available to do the record linkage, but I'm going to take a slightly different tack here, is that here is the data set. There are some subjects in both data, some same subjects in the both data set, but we don't know who are the same subjects. Okay, so we have two data sets. So we have one data set that has an X and a Y, and the other data set has an X and a Z. And we don't know, we want to really, we know that some people in X are the same as some people in here. And we don't know who they are. It's not a deterministic matching you can do. So essentially, if you have a good predictor, a good relationship between Y and X, so you can predict the Y hat for all these people here. You can also predict Z hat for all these people here. If they are good predictors, then Y hat and Z hat gives you a good summary measures to start off with. Because now you have a Y hat and Z hat, which has a good summary measures to start off with your matching process. So the way we do this is that we have this match on Y hat and Z hat, the subjects in the two databases. And then once you have matched them, then we look at the X, remaining X, to see who are good matches within that block that are matched on Y and Z. So then we have a pool of candidate who are sort of match between the data set 2 and data set 1, and then we kind of match them and then create sort of a synthesized match records, which is the average of the X and then the Y and Z. And if we get the correctly matched, then this provides a way to estimate the correlation coefficient between Y and Z, partial correlation between Y and Z given X. But if you get a wrong matches, then I think that is shifting it towards 0 because it's going towards the conditional independence. If you have more than one match possible, then we do a random selection. That way you create the uncertainty about the matches as well. Now, of course, this is not a perfect. So what we do is that we kind of use these matches and then do some sort of a hand coding of those matches and make sure that those are really matches that are assessed by multiple people. So we use multiple people to look through those records, a sample of those records, and then they make an assessment that whether they are a match or not a match. And once you have that relationship, that information that they are really match or are not match, then we append those we think there are good matches into this data set they are not matched. So these are the people who are hand-coded, and then they are found to be matched, and then we append that to the non-matched cases. And then now we can do multiply imputing Y and Z, and that is kind of getting information about the partial correlation between Y and Z given X. And that is the information that we are getting it from here. And that's the way we did the matching. Now, the other way of matching is that if you have a different subjects in the two data sets, then you have it is kind of what is called as a data fusion problem. You have a common covariate X, and then you have a Y available here, Z available here. You want to really use this data to kind of explore possible relationship between Y and Z, or even improve the distribution of Y and distribution of Z, because the X may be different across the two data set. So there's no information to estimate the partial correlation between Y and Z given X, because there's no overlap. So in this case, we have to bring in the external information about the partial correlation coefficient. One is that the same approach that we used is that there's no value of X for Z once Y is known. That would mean the partial correlation between YZ dot X is same as YZ. This is kind of a measurement error model approach. The other approach is that you get a bound for the partial correlation. Because the partial correlation has to be between -1 and +1, then you can get a bound for the correlation coefficient. Here, if you, in the absence of any information, you can put in a uniform prior over the specified range. Sometimes you may have a knowledge about that correlation is going to be positive. Then that also narrows down the bound. Then you can put a prior distribution over the range A and B, and then you estimate the free parameters, and then compute the correlation coefficient under approach 1, or you draw the value of the remaining correlation coefficient, and then do the imputation, draw from a trivariate normal distribution with the estimated mean and covariance matrix. You can also use a bootstrap and then estimate the parameters to propagate the uncertainty in the parameter estimate if a draw from this distribution is complex. So these are the two approaches that one could use in a multiple imputation framework, where you are trying to get a sample of matched cases that you're comfortable with and use that information to impute the unmatched cases. Now, the piecing together these data sources by using appropriate technique, whether it's a measurement error technique or it's a record linkage technique or a missing data technique, all these data sets are used to create that kind of aligned, vertically concatenated or horizontally concatenated data set. Then, after doing that, I think we may need additional information we may have to collect, or we may want to do an additional sample survey to collect a small portion of the data that is needed to make up for information that is not there in the data set. So here, I think I'm trying to create sort of a statistical population or statistical registry data, and then use that to draw inference. And then the final step would be the prediction model to fill the entire population. So the last example I want to talk about is that, how much time do I have? 3? Okay. So the last example I want to talk about the small area estimation, where you have an increasing demand for the small area estimates with a varying definition of small areas. Sometimes people want to county, census tract, or districts. Sometimes they want to have a neighborhood, this 1 mile, 5 mile radius around household address, and so on and so forth. And then these are all multiple uses. Sometimes they are used, estimates are used as an outcome. Sometimes estimates are used as a covariate, or estimates are used as an auxiliary variable for sampling frame itself. So we took recently, we wanted to create a total years of education in the household and age distribution of children living in a certain geographical areas. Both these variables of interest, partly from the sampling frame perspective, and also for our other client that they wanted to know about the years of education in some districts. Now, the data sources that we used was the American Community Survey, but this is aggregated data. This is not the individual level data we don't have, but this is the aggregated level, the block group level data. And then we had a large scale face-to-face survey, screening effect that was conducted by Survey Research Center, University of Michigan for another survey. So the collection of surveys that we did lot of screening. So we did an area probability sample, we did a screening, and then we built in these questions that we wanted to estimate in those large-scale surveys. And we also acquired commercial data that are available at the household level. And then we built in some overlapping with the screening effort area. So all these gave you the same variables, but they are conceptual measure, but they had treated them as separate variables. So we did not want to interchange the total years of education from the ACS to be same as the total years of education in our survey research center survey as well as the commercial center. So we consider it as 3 variables that we are trying to correct. So the multiple imputation first was to disaggregate all the aggregated data to the individual level, because that's kind of a reverse engineering. From the aggregated data, we went to the disaggregated data. And then multiply impute the missing values. And then aggregate the data again back to the desired areas. So here is the data structure. So we sampled the addresses from the various block groups, and we obtained, and then this ACS data is available for all of them, all of the sample block groups. And then survey is available for selection of block groups. And then commercial data we bought for some of those addresses where there was a survey, as well as the places where there was no survey. So we bought this data set from a commercial data source. So there's a paper, my student, Sakshog, made he has an approach where he takes the aggregated data and then disaggregate it for the ACS. So here are 4 strata. There are 4 strata that are available. Is that one where you have all 3 variables available, some you have 2 variables, and so on. And depending upon the available information, you use the aggregated X in individual Y, or aggregated X individual Y and individual Z, or aggregated X in individual Z, or aggregated X, to really disaggregate this create a synthetic ACS data. Then next is to, we use a hierarchical model to essentially disaggregate the data when you have the individual level variable using the MCMC approach. Now, once you have a disaggregated data, we created the L synthetic data sets and then multiply imputed them, each of the synthetic data set, and then age distribution was computed from each of the completed data set, and then average. That is kind of approximate posterior mean of the age distribution, and then compute the between data variance and approximate posterior variance. So because X, Y, and Z are conceptually the same measurement, so we could realize that Y is best way to measure it. Therefore, mean of imputed Y could be used, or weighted mean of X, Y, and Z weighted by the inverse of the variances could be used, or you can use a regression estimate based on unimputed Y and imputed X and Z. These are various ways in which you can construct the estimate of the area mean. So in summary, I think the multiple imputation provides a kind of a convenient framework to handle missing data, measurement error, record linkage, data integration in general. And I think explicit model assumptions allows for a transparent system, and then incorporation of the prior information from sub-studies, pilots, published literature, et cetera, makes this an important tool to bring in the external knowledge. And again, because I think we are relying on the model quite a bit, I think model checking and diagnostics are really important critical aspects of a multiple imputation framework. I think George mentioned that. I think that has to be sort of a routine when we are using this kind of a methodology. By no means the task is easy. It requires sort of a statistical modeling expertise. And then some software development is needed. But I think as a statistician, that's what we are built for, to do statistical modeling. And therefore, it shouldn't be difficult for us to go on this one. Benefit can be enormous, and I think pushing this technology, pushing this data integration in a suitable way might be a way to produce a better product for policy decisions. Thank you.
Tú tenías una pregunta para George, pero supongo que es la misma para Raghu.
No, eso lo hago diferente porque combina diferentes bases de datos de fuentes diferentes, ¿verdad? Pero en el caso de George, me queda la duda porque todos los ejercicios que hacía de simulación eran sobre una misma base de datos. Generalmente nosotros en las encuestas tenemos diseños de muestras complejos. Eso significa que utilizan muestrado de conglomerados en 2, 3 o más etapas, estratificados, y eso implica que las observaciones tienen diferentes ponderaciones. Entonces, ¿cómo utiliza el diseño de las encuestas y esas ponderaciones en esas simulaciones para imputar los datos?
Great question. And in HIS and Enhance example, there were different designs, different complex designs were used. So the way I think we use it is to uncomplex the complex design for each survey. So essentially, we have a methodology that takes a non-parametric approach to create the population from the sample. It's kind of an inverse sampling. And we do that for both surveys, HIS and Enhance survey. So the complex sample survey design is taken out by creating that synthetic populations with the missing values. And then we concatenate and impute the missing values. So the other way of doing it is to, whatever the variables that were used in the design as a predictors in the model. And that's another alternative approach for doing that.